this case study deals with Koshik, who's a Korean elephant that's famous for his ability to quote-unquote speak up to 7 Korean words. Now, speak is in quotes here because, as we'll discuss in just a moment, his speaking is more imitating as opposed to generative speech. But that's why that's there. Now, within studies of language, there's sort of a clear, well, I guess it's a murky line as to what we can call language versus not language, and whether we can deem that other species are using a language or a proto-language or whatever we want to call it. And that is a debate that is far beyond the scope of this course. But let's think critically about this special case and see what we think as non-experts in the field of language about what we can draw from this situation. So if you've already watched the video or read the section of the textbook where they talk about Koshik, then you don't have to watch this YouTube video at the bottom. You could also watch this YouTube video at the bottom. It's just a link to the same or a news story about this particular situation, just to give you an idea of what this elephant speaking sounds like, and a little bit of backstory. But a Coles Notes version of it is that Koshik imitated his caretakers, and so over time has been able to make more and more sounds, specifically by using his trunk to help make the right shapes with his mouth to produce sounds. Now, the running theory is that he probably started mimicking his human caretakers because there aren't other elephants at the zoo, and social interaction is very important to elephants, and so he found a way to communicate, or at least socialize, with the human caretakers. And so if this is a case of communication, this would be a very rare example of cross-species communication. It's not very often that different species can convey information between them. But this is where we start our critical thinking. We have to decide if mimicking is actually a form of communication. Is it sufficient to fall under our discussion of language? Now, the sort of ruling of this from the experts in the field would be that although he's mimicking his caregivers, he isn't really demonstrating some of the critical aspects of language or communication that would be required for this to be real communication. So by just mimicking, he isn't demonstrating productivity or the creation of new messages. So he's just saying things that he's heard before. He's not putting those words together in novel conformations. He's not making new things or getting across new ideas. So kind of like some parrots will just repeat back what they've heard before without really understanding meaning. This would be categorized about the same way, unless that we could show that Koshik is demonstrating a deeper association with the words that he's using and how he's using them. So if there was an experiment set up where he could assign meaning or show that there was some kind of meaning to those words, then we could talk again later. But for now, we're still at this stage of he can imitate, and it's very interesting that he can, because this is almost unheard of. Parrots are one of the very few species that will imitate humans, but it doesn't quite reach that milestone, reach that threshold for this to be called real communication, for this to be considered language. So that's just a neat little thought exercise getting us to think critically before we get started here.